Hey guys, today we're going to do a dapple gray model, and I wanted to show you how you can use soft pastels on your freshly primed model to create unique looks. I'm going to go over some of the techniques that I use to add a little bit of depth to the color and also hair detail, which is really important. The things that you're going to need are some soft pastels. These are Faber Castel. I prefer these just because they have a good amount of pigment. The price is reasonable, and they crumble down pretty easily. You're going to need an X-Acto, scissors, razor, something so that you can take these soft pastel sticks and grind them down into powder. You're also going to need 3 brushes. For these I use chisel brushes, and you'll notice that they are pretty worn down. A lot of times I will cut them off, but I have a tiny one, and then I've got 2 chisel blenders here that are just a bit wider and longer. Additionally, you're going to need to get a eraser pencil. This is just a normal pencil, but it has an eraser head on it, and you can sharpen it. It just helps get a lot more details that way. If you don't have access to that, or in addition to, just go get some erasers. You can go to the dollar store and get about 25 of them for $1. The kind that you put on your pencil, and preferably the kind that comes kind of down to a point like this. Additionally, some pastel pencils. This is just something else you can use to add more detail, and I have a black and a white one here. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that you're going to want to do is prepare your materials. If you haven't done so already, you're going to pick the colors that you're going to use, and you're going to ground them down into pastel dust. I'll show you how I do that. I already have some mixed up here, but let me just go ahead and show you how I do that. For that one, I'm going to use this stick. You just take the stick out, hold it over whatever receptacle you want to use. You can even put it on paper if you want, and just glide your X-Acto, your blade, whatever you have, over the top of it. And you're just pretty much grinding it down, and you want to try and make it a nice fine powder. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of going over it, and it's just pulling off small amounts of chalk dust. And if you look in the box right now, you can see the dust. So that's good. I've got good material to work with. So you're going to want to do this beforehand, before you get started, mainly because it's kind of a dirty job. You'll notice I've already got pastel chalk on my hands. So you want to get this all out of the way before you start handling your model. Okay, so I've already started doing some pasteling on this model on this side. You see I've got a little bit of a base color, pretty much a mix of raw and burnt sienna for my colors here. So what I'm going to do is, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see everything, and then we'll zoom in for a better look. But to start with, I'm going to go ahead and get my reddish brown so I can get started on this side, and that's here. And I'm going to take my chisel brush, it's kind of the longer one. I'm going to pick up some of the powder. Let me try and get down there and show you how I do that. Pick up some of the powder in the case with my brush. It's pretty simple. Once I have it picked up, I'm going to apply it to the model. The way I do that is just basically hold the model in my hand, and I come through and start adding dapples. Dapples are interesting. I like to think of trying to make tree branches or clouds. They're irregular, so the more irregular that you can make them, the more realistic that they will be. And as you can see, when you first get started, you might be a little unsure of what you're doing, but just continue onward. Now, if you're not really familiar with dapples on a horse or how they look naturally, you really need to work from a photo. In my case, with this particular horse, I've done enough dapples that I'm pretty happy with what I've done so far as patterns, but it never hurts. It's always a good idea to use a reference photo. Okay, so now I've done a couple of dapples. Some of them look a little wonky. That's okay. Next, I'm going to come in with, this is a bit of a softer brush. It's got a rounder tip. You'll notice the really long hairs. If it's got really long hairs, they're really good at blending. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to soften this look by just kind of taking it over in a circular motion. And I'm going over the chalk dust that I've already applied. You'll notice that when you do this, it instantly softens the look and kind of spreads it out, or smears it, is what you might think of. And so I'm not even going to go back on this stuff I hadn't done any blending on at all. And so now what we've got is kind of the same thing. It just looks like I smeared it around. So I'm going to come back in. I want to add a little bit more shoulder work here, because I noticed I didn't do that quite that much. Keep in mind, this is a base color, or a base layer. So you're going to be adding more colors on top. And so it doesn't really have to be perfect on the base layer, but it's a good idea if you can make it as nice as possible. Now, if you're not working from a photo, or where you have both sides of the horse to look at, you're going to want to double check the other side and make sure that you're kind of staying along the same lines. As you can tell, I've got a lot of star dapples on the front of the neck, and then it kind of blossoms into different types of dapples with stars continuing down on the barrel. And I don't have any stars yet that I have formed here, so that's something I've got to work on. So what I'm going to do now, something that kind of gives it more of a dramatic look, is in the indentions on the muscles. You see the indention here on the neck, down through the throat latch. If you leave those white on a gray horse, it just gives it kind of a unique pop look to the color. That's why I'm choosing to do that with this particular horse, just so that it stands out a bit more, especially with this beautiful color that we've got going on. So all I'm doing right now is just adding a bit more color into certain spots. Okay, and I'm going to try and zoom in to show you what that actually looks like. Okay, hopefully y'all can see this pretty well. But let's see, I'll start here in the shoulder. I'm just going to kind of come in here. You notice I'm using kind of circular motions, and basically what you're doing is pressing the powder into the primer that's on the model. And then you can obviously blow off any dust that you get. I'm going to go ahead and start adding a little bit of star look here. There and there a little bit. And you can see I'm getting definitely more of a red look to it with the more of the pasteling application that I apply. Now normally, if I wanted to get really, really fine lines, I would grab my even smaller chisel shader that I've cut down and come back in and really give it some more definition through here. There we go. Kind of go out a bit more and a bit more definition. But this is not the end point for dapples. There's other ways to make them stand out a bit more, and I end up using all of these techniques on every one of the horses I do. For this particular horse, he's also going to have some dark or black and gray coming up the leg. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the black just so I can show y'all what that would look like. So coming up here through the elbow area, on up the shoulder, and again with the dust, just blow it off if you get any extra. And this is a really strong black. You can see it instantly stand out amongst the base colors that I've already done. Go ahead and start a star dapple here on the leg. And they can be rough. It doesn't have to be nice and sharp when you're first getting started. All of that is okay. And now I'm just kind of blending it in. Now I'm going to go back to my shader, and I'm going to kind of blend this in a little bit to get a softer look. You notice how that instantly takes away some of the strongness. Now we're going to have to put some of that back to really get a more dramatic look, but this is more blended at this point. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but I have kind of an unusual line. It goes like right through here. That happened with the black when I applied it. It could have been I had a little bit of a rock in the pigment when I applied it. This is a good point to make. You definitely want to make sure that your pastels are ground up as tiny as possible, because even when you shove it on the brush, you can have a tiny rock and you can end up with some irregular patterns that you didn't try and apply. I'm going to go back over it and see if I can change that a little bit. Yeah, it pretty much got rid of it, but let's say it didn't. Something that you can do is go ahead and get your eraser pencil and come in here and add a little bit of hair detail, and while you're doing that, go ahead and pick up anything that you missed. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm adding a little bit of star dapples to the coat and just picking up some of the pigment. Now, if you use an eraser pencil like this, after you pick up the pigment on it a couple of times, you're going to notice that it's dirty. So usually you can clean it on your jeans. You can, like this case, I'm just going to pull it off with my fingertip. But it's going to get dirty. You want to make sure that you're not applying color that you didn't intend to apply. So make sure it's clean. You can also just use paper, which is what I have down here right now that I'm using to apply this. Now, right now, the dapples that I'm making them a little too white than how I would normally like for a finished look, but it's lifting off the parts that I want to. This is how you can get a nice star dapple look with a little bit more sharpness to it. Okay. Okay, so back to the neck. What I'm doing at this point is just adding a little bit more of burnt sienna onto the neckline. And hopefully you can see the darker areas there that I added. Now I'm also going to go ahead and add a little bit of black. And because it's just a small amount of black that I'm going to add, I've got my very small chisel shader out. And let me pick up a little bit of black. And I'm just going to add it here at the base, kind of if there was any shading. That's pretty much where it would be. I'm applying it very softly, so you'll notice you should be able to see kind of some dust kind of just sitting on top. And pretty much the strength of the color is dictated by how much you press or how much force that you use. So just gliding across the top is not going to give me a lot, which is perfect. Okay, so I've got a line. You can pretty much see it pretty well there. And now I'm just going to take my shader and blend it a little bit. And when I did that, you instantly noticed all those dapples I just put in. Can't really see them that well. So I'm going to come back in with my pencil eraser. And I'm going to add tiny little stars there. And on this one, I've almost made the tip a little too fine. I don't want it to be quite that fine. And all I'm doing is just picking up a little bit of color with each one. And you can even use your finger for blending. The trick is make sure your hands are clean. Working with pastels, you're going to get the chalk everywhere. There's really no way around it. So make sure that your hands are clean. Some people actually like to use gloves. My problem with using gloves on models is I can't always have a good hold on them. And it's really important that I'm able to hold them firmly. So I would much rather have to get up, wash my hands, do whatever I need to so that I can hold it with my bare hand. Okay, and again, I'm going to come in here with a little bit of hair detail, and all I'm doing, the direction of the way the horse's hair goes is it's pretty much straight down here. Once it gets to the legs, in here to the elbow area, it continues this way. From the legs, it pretty much goes straight down. The same through the barrel, just up and down until you hit the flank area. You have this kind of interesting pattern where it kind of swoops out this way and then comes down, and then here from the point of the hip it goes out and on back that way. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of following the way the hair would go. I'm picking up a very small amount of pigment and I'm just adding a little bit of hair detail to it. Now with this particular eraser, like I said, it's adding some very strong, sharp lines, a little bit more drastic than what I'd like. So I'm going to pick up my other eraser that apparently has left the building. Oh, it fell on the floor. Of course. Pick up my other eraser, and I'm just going to soften some of that just because I've got some very strong lines. I don't want them quite that strong. There we go. And in some cases it picks up too much, and again, if that happens, just pick up your pastels and add them right back. The great thing about pastels is you can experiment with them, you can do all kinds of stuff, and you can always fix it. So don't be afraid to experiment. The biggest thing to remember, and it's the same as like when you work with acrylics, is it's always easier to go darker, but you can't go lighter without starting over. So keep that in mind. It's always easier to go darker. You can't go lighter unless you start over. So always err on the side of less color. All right, and you can see here I am adding just a little bit more hair detail. Now, another thing that you can do if you enjoy airbrushing, you want to airbrush a base color and then come back in and add star dapples or whatever kind of dapples you want to with your pastels or even with an eraser. Calm art paints, which are like these here, you can apply them, do a very light color, and then go back over with an eraser to remove them. It's not as easy as using the soft pastels for removing, so I would recommend that you do it on a small area first and then work your way up to doing a full model that way. The great thing about soft pastels is you can be very precise with your application, and unless you're really good with an airbrush or you have a really good nozzle or airbrush gun, you're going to have a hard time being consistent. Little clogs in your paint or a little bit of water in your line, which is all standard stuff when dealing with an airbrush, can blop out paint or water right in the middle of your tiny work, and that can pretty much ruin what you've done. So you don't ever want to have to, go back and redo something. So I usually never use an airbrush for tiny detail work. It's just my own preference. I'm sure everybody has, their own things that they'd rather do.